our 2023 preview for the Carolina Panthers. When I look at this team, I just can't help but see some of the similarities between this and what happened in Jacksonville over the last year. And it wasn't as much of a disaster. You know, the Matt Rule era was not what the Urban Meyer era was. Right. And I actually think that the Matt Rule regime did a decent job of assembling some players and getting some players for this group. But you have this team that, you know, just didn't all come together. They're cycling between quarterbacks. They can never figure it out. And now you get your guy. You get your guy with the number 1 overall pick. And I don't think Bryce Young is a Trevor Lawrence level prospect, but still, you go get your guy with the number 1 overall pick. And then you have somebody who is just such not a college rah-rah guy in the same way that Doug Peterson isn't. You just have this proven NFL head coach who brings in kind of a more different professional demeanor. There's an example when I was at camp that just jumped out to me. Like they're done by like 5 p.m. Like the players are just done by like 5 p.m. It's like a 9 to 5. They have their evenings. Last year, they were going to like 9 o'clock every single night. Oh, and I know that that's like a pretty typical offseason storyline where you shit on the old coach. But I just do feel like it's a little bit different in terms of how they're treating the guys there and how it feels there than it did under Matt Rule. And I do think they stand to benefit from that, even independent of the potential uptick in coaching quality that they're going to get.
Right. Frank Reich he's like an NFL lifer. When you get these guys,
he sure is.
You get these guys that play for a while and they're assistants and they become head coaches. It's just, they look at it through a different lens. They understand the grind. But they assembled a super staff, that whole, both sides of the ball. They got a lot of big names, a lot of hot young coaching candidates that were named on the list. You know, talk about, you know, Thomas Brown being one from the Rams that like he was a hot name the last few years.
He's their offensive coordinator now.
Offensive coordinator. They get, God, I almost did it again, but they get Josh McCown. I always want to say Luke. They get Josh McCown as quarterback coach, who almost was the Texans head coach out of nowhere. But but he was a name get floated around. There's a lot of hot names for these young coaches. The defensive side of the ball doing the same. So they've assembled a team that's super interesting. It's a lot of competency as far as the coaching staffs. And then now they moved up for the number 1 pick and they have an interesting roster. It's just it's a team that really there's arrows that can point any direction, like with it, just who they've assembled and just like what they've put together. So just, I want to see the first step and just see what it looks like in this 2023 season, because it's unique. It's just, you don't really see kind of these super staffs put together like this that much as far as coaching wise. And then they move up for the number 1 pick. So a lot of kind of just catalysts for big moments. And that's what they kind of have right now.
Biggest question about the offense. We can talk about Bryce Young. I think there's plenty of questions, but mine is, what is this thing going to look like?
Yeah.
Because you mentioned that this collection of people from disparate backgrounds. And again, I kind of come back to Jacksonville because with the Jags, you see some of the Doug Peterson Philly roots, but then it's paired with a lot more pre-snap motion, a lot more movement, play action throws. And think about Thomas Brown's background with the Rams. Like, I just assume you're going to have a Frank Reich baseline offense with a lot more of those specific elements, similar to what we saw in Jacksonville, where you're bringing over the Colts offense was pretty stagnant last year, not a lot of motion. We know how much the Rams use. So that it's simplistic. Like, I think it's going to be more interesting than that, but those kind of Frank Reich ideas with a little bit more motion, a little bit more movement with where Thomas Brown comes from, that would be my guess. But I don't really know. But that's my biggest question. Like, what is this thing going to be with these guys' backgrounds?
I'm right there with you, especially like with Frank Reich when he was with the Colts. They had so many different quarterbacks, and so they evolved every year.
So true.
So that changed. So it's not even like I go, oh, Frank Reich's going to run this. I know he'll run one concept, which is called snag, and he already ran it in the first preseason game, which is a flat route, a corner route, and an inside hitch route, a triangle read. You'll see a lot of offenses run it. Frank Reich loves that concept. And sure enough, I saw Bryce Young run it a couple times already, just in the first couple drives. But anyways, I'm right there with you, because don't know even like little things like, are they going to be a lot of under center? Because Bryce Young can handle under center. He's actually pretty good footwork and everything.
I don't know.
All these guys at back, or are they going to be gun heavy? You know, Miles Sanders is better as a gun running back. So it's just when you got so many new faces, it's what's the identity that it ends up taking. So I'm right there with you. I just have a lot of questions. I'm intrigued. And I think just kind of everybody's balanced nature, I think is a good way to put it, that they've all had different kind of offenses that they've been involved with. So what they go with this kind of personnel grouping is just super, super interesting. And also, I just have questions about, the pass catchers that they have. I think this team is going to be built through the run game.
So
with their
put a
offensive
pin
line
in that, because I want to ask you, if we're building the offense, how would you build an offense around Bryce Young's strengths? Like, what would the pillars of that offense be? Because we've seen successful offenses around rookie quarterbacks. They take a lot of what that guy liked, what he did, and then eventually you'll evolve it over time. But you want to make sure that you're putting him in a position where he's comfortable. So if you are building around Bryce Young, not being able to talk to Bryce Young, obviously, what would you do?
It sounds the weird comparison I have, but maybe it's like a late career Drew Brees type offense with Sean Payton, where it's hey, we have a strong running game and then we spread it out and let him just knife you with underneath throws and intermediate throws. I think Bryce Young he has a fine arm, but it's not overwhelming, but he's accurate and he can throw some BBs on the outside. Like he'll pin it right on guys. So pass catcher wise, I would get, like, of course I like my big bodies, but I would get guys that can run.
They have a couple of those,
and if
you think about the way that group is assembled, I think you're going to be surprised by how many targets Laviska Shenault gets in this offense this year. Him and Jonathan Mingo. I think that they're just going to try to scheme up ways to get yak opportunities for those two guys and just make things a little bit easier on your quarterback.
Mingo's raw, but he has the best juice and the most juice and probably the best skill set for what I think would be good with Bryce Young. Like, I think that's kind of why I think Mingo, people are going to a little ahead of themselves. I think he's going to take a minute, but I do think that long term, if he does hit, that's the type of skill set that I like with Bryce Young. Guys that can work over the middle or take a 5-yard ball and go 20 yards with it.
That's a skill set. I mean, he's 220 pounds, tested like crazy, but he's not going to. He's a mover, and so they drafted him in the second round.
No nuance to his route running. He just runs. It's great. It wins. It works. Don't get me wrong, but it's that's why I'm saying he's going to take a minute, because he's a funny route runner, because he's just such an overwhelming athlete.
That's my secondary question about this offense. Have they surrounded Bryce Young with enough for him to hit the ground running? Compared to other situations with number one quarterbacks that go number one overall, think about what Joe Burrow was dropped into in Cincinnati. Correct. Think about what Trevor Lawrence was dropped into in Jacksonville. This is different than that. Yeah. They brought the line back almost totally intact. The line coach comes back, and the pass catchers aren't great, but I do think that they've put enough around him to not set him up to fail. And I think that's really important. Maybe that's the optimistic view. I think it's worth asking, have they put enough around him at those spots? Adam Thielen's deep into his career, but apparently he's looked really good in camp. He's moving well. Like, the GPS numbers are more impressive than they potentially thought they were going to be with him. And now you have DJ Chark, who's had some really good splash moments. Can he stay healthy? Hayden Hurst was really solid for the Bengals last year. I understand the thought process. Even if you paid a lot for Thielen, you think, man, we just got to make sure we're putting this guy in a good spot. Like, we got a rookie quarterback. We got some money to throw around over the next 2 years. I get it. Now it's just a question of, is it enough? Does it rise to a level where you actually have given him more than other quarterbacks in similar spots?
I think the two parts for this is the first kind of part of it of saying, compared to these other young quarterbacks, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, even kind of Mac Jones-ish, and maybe, other guys, Burrow that you mentioned as well. Herbert had a great one, so I'm not going to include him. But
he was in a very good situation. Not
great
line-wise, but pass catching-wise.
Yeah, even Tua, his first years with the Dolphins, initially until they added some real juice. This is a nice kind of, but the line I'm using is they have plenty of playable players. That is, if that makes sense, guys that are okay on the field. Are they needle movers? We'll see, or maybe not, but maybe not be optimistic, but they're playable. Their baseline is high. And I think that's a good place to start. And also, there's kind of some dividends that could get paid with that for Bryce Young, is that if he can work with these guys and then they drop in some juice down the road, then it's like, oh, okay, there we go. Now it makes his life a little easier as he works, he starts aiming smaller, then the target becomes bigger down the road. So I think I talk out both sides of my mouth with it. It's like, I think it's like a B- group, but it's not bad. It's fine. It's more than fine. And it's more than fine for a young quarterback, because Adam Thielen at the very least is a competent route runner. He's got good hands and he'll block and work. And so he'll do some dirty work stuff. He's playable. Should he be a number 3, number 4 at this point in his career? Probably, but he's not a guy that should not be playing. So I think that's where I'm at with it. It's kind of, again, talking out both sides of my mouth, but there's competency there that I think is going to help this year and down the road.
it's important, I think, to remind ourselves, because when you have this young, exciting quarterback and the staff has all these stars on it, like, oh man, like how good could they be right away? That's not where this team is. This team isn't along the timeline in the same way that the Falcons are. They have $51 million in dead money this year. They're eating the McCaffrey deal. They're eating the Robbie Anderson deal. They're not in that space where they're kind of pushing it. So I think it's important to kind of reset expectations that this team is way closer to the beginning than the end. So even if there are some fits and starts and you look at the pass catching group and it leaves you cold, that's okay, because this truly is like year one or a year 1.5, because you built a little bit of the support system compared to a rebuilding team, compared to a team that's in like year 3 of the build like the Falcons are. So even if I think the best case scenario for this team is pretty competitive, if it's not, you're good. Like it's fine if it's just if it's kind of meh over the course of the season, especially with those pass catchers. As long as he's not in a bad situation, you can live with it this year if you're a Panthers fan.
That's it. You just want to see flashes with the quarterback. Really, that's number one answer. It's like, okay, he's our guy. That's really the biggest question that you want to answer this year. I like that. I like your framing, is that I think they're gonna have some stretches where they look pretty damn good, and there's gonna be some very frustrating stretches where you're like, oh man, they still need some pieces. So like you said, it's like maybe with their owner, this is more like it's almost like handicap in golf, like 4 for 3. This is year 1 as year 2. And so maybe next year is year 2 as year 3. I feel like that's kind of fair. I feel like that's pretty fair with maybe their ownership group. Also, I do want to say, playing against the Jets in that first preseason game, Jets had some heat coming at that offensive line. Holy shit. Bryce Huff was just oh my God, he made their offensive line's day just rough. But what was good, what wasn't good was Bryce Young took some real licks, took some 3 big hits. What was good is he got back up and looked fine. It was unfazed. And it's like, but let's just limit those shots until the regular season starts, please. Because I'm still a little concerned about that with Young's size.
They'll be able to throw some money around next year if they want to in free agency. I mean, it's not hard to imagine them getting
interesting receiver group too, right?
$50-60 million in free agency. And here, we're going to talk about this a bunch with the Panthers. Every time we talk about them in a team building sense over the next couple of years, when you trade what you did for the quarterback, you need him to be so good because you don't have the pieces. DJ Moore was on this team. DJ Moore is no longer on this team. So it's DJ Moore plus 2 first-round picks plus a second-round pick, or 2 second-round picks. I mean, the amount of pieces they gave up to go get Bryce Young, it's going to be a little bit harder to build that team around him. But you still have the rookie quarterback contract financially. So if you want to spend in free agency a little bit, you can. So, but that's going to be the challenge, is that in order to get that guy, you hamstrung yourself in other areas. That's the give and take that comes with a move like this.
And that's the thing. Say like their offensive line, who I'm pretty high on. I think it's a pretty dang good offensive line, who looked rough in that first preseason game, though, which had me a little worried. They're all under contract for next year, too, in 2024, which is a good thing. But if someone falls off, someone that we think is above average is now bad, it's going to be hard for them to upgrade, because there's only so many resources you can spend. So just going off the example you had, it's that if they're caught in some of these guys that they're locked in on, it's going to be hard to kind of maneuver off of it because of what they did with the quarterback. I should say maneuver off of it, add real juice, add that real pedigree to it. Yeah. That's maybe the line I should go with.
Biggest question about Carolina Panthers defense in 2023. What do you got for me?
I can this be a real deal unit, like a real up there unit, highly ranked unit that I want to keep my eye on every week? We mentioned them a little bit. You mentioned them as maybe like an honorable mention for the top 10 defenses. And every time I go over this roster, I get really high on them. And I get more optimistic about what they look like with the defensive coordinator that I think will use their skill sets really well. And in Evero. So I'm way more higher on them than I even was 2 weeks ago. But it's just like one of these things. Every time I look at it, I'm like, man, they got some damn good pieces at all 3 levels. Every position's got a guy that can be a potential dude, maybe not linebacker, but they still have decent pieces there. But man, they got
how dare you speak that way about my guy Frankie Louvu? I'm going to talk about him later.
Oh, I got okay. Frankie Louvu, though, this is a good example of how, because he can be an on the ball Sam, old school Sam linebacker.
Correct. Or they used him on the defense on the line a lot last year.
How I picture them using it, and I should watch the defense just to see, with this defense that's a tight mint type defense where it's a 3-3-5. That's what's glorified. Him as the linebacker that's on the ball, like that's like the jack role, they call it. That is like a perfect role for him because he can rush the passer, he can drop into coverage, he can play the run.
Funny that you say that.
What, am I stealing your thunder? You
No,
got some
because
notes on this?
one of my thoughts was, can this team play like the Broncos did last year?
Yeah.
And the answer is yes.
They have a great
it's because of somebody like that.
Yeah.
They ran a lot of kind of penny fronts last year, which is 5-man front with one linebacker off the ball. You could easily do that with this team. You could walk Frankie Louvu down, have him play outside linebacker, and Shaq Thompson's your off the ball linebacker.
Absolutely.
And the amount of simulated pressures that the Broncos ran last year, the amount of blitzing, Broncos is one of the blitz happiest teams in the NFL last season. You have the personnel with this group to do specifically that.
Yeah,
Brian Burns can drop into coverage. He did it pretty deftly last year, like 3 or 4 times a game. He's comfortable in that space. And then you look at the back end, JC Horn can do what Patrick Surtain did for you. He's not the same level of player, but the amount of like man everywhere he goes, backside things where you're like, you got that guy. We'll play zone everywhere else. You got that guy. Theoretically, you have the corner to do that. Right. You bring in Von Bell as a smart safety, kind of in the same way that Justin Simmons can be.
Yep.
I'm with you. Like, I think that the best case scenario, they potentially have enough needle movers at each level of the defense where this group can be really good. They are thin, though.
Yes.
That is the biggest issue. Like, this team needed to sign Justin Houston off the street to be their other pass rusher, their other kind of edge player. Then they signed him a week ago. Justin Houston's 34. It feels like Justin Houston's 39. The idea that he's younger than me still is hilarious. But other than that, I mean, you get into the interior, like they shined Deshaun Williams to like a 1-year deal. He was on the Broncos last year with Evero. Like there's just not a lot of depth at a lot of these places. Like Yetur Gross-Matos played a ton of snaps for them last year. He finished 10th in pass rush snaps among edge players last year. He finished 69th in pressures. The guys behind their starters, a lot of these positions, I think would leave you a little bit worried. But again, it's the $15 million in dead money. Like this is the stage they're at in the team building process.
Yeah. But everything you're bringing up, like with the simulated pressures, it's like, Shaq Thompson kind of got unlocked a little bit as, Phil Snow the last few years, the defense coordinator for the Panthers, was using all these exotic third down blitzes and letting him work out the line of scrimmage and run back into coverage and use his athleticism. And that's kind of what you get asked to do with this defense too. Just different variations of using.
It makes a lot of sense.
And using Jeremy Chin, kind of can use him as a blitzer or in the box. Like, they just, there's a perfect match of new defensive coordinator with the current regime that they have. It's like, this current personnel that they have. It's like, this makes sense. It's not square peg round holing this unit at all. So
beyond how good he was last year as a defensive coordinator, but the Broncos, before they got hurt, first half of the season, they were second in pass defense DVOA.
One of the most fun watches. Because they just brought they brought the second place team in simulated pressures last year. Just the amount of them, like they doubled the rate of how many they brought it's perfect for what the Panthers are going to do. So I think it's gonna be cool.
Couple quick notes before we get to the categories here. Chin played 42% of his snaps in the slot last year. Seems like that's going to be his main role this season after they brought in Von Bell and Xavier Woods. I think that makes a ton of sense. And
hybrid role for a hybrid defender. That's perfect for him.
Again, just one more piece that makes sense given the other ones. And the spot I worry the most about last season, the guys behind or next to Derek Brown, Matt Ioannidis and Bravion Roy were the only defensive tackles for them other than Derek Brown, who played 250 snaps. Neither of them's not even on the roster.
Right.
They both got straight up released. They brought in Shai Tuttle in free agency, but I wonder if that means they feel good about the group, if they were trying to save money, because it doesn't feel like they have a ton of depth there. So I just thought that was notable. We'll see what happens. I'm excited to watch what Evero can do with this group, though. I really am.
I am too. I know it's one of those where I was like, man, I kind of want to do the top 10 defenses again to give these guys more of a shout, because it's like you look at them, it's like this really, man, maybe you got a stew going. Like that's what it feels like.
Dante Jackson's had trouble staying healthy. JC Horn's had trouble staying healthy. Behind them, it's like Keith Taylor. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff there to consider. All right, your X factor for the 2023 Panthers. What do you got?
Because I couldn't just say a quarterback for each one. I said the passing game. And this is a mix of the coaches figuring out their best stuff that we alluded to. Bryce Young and how quickly he hits the ground running. He, people were optimistic that he is the most polished of this next group of quarterbacks that came into the league, that he was the one that was the most pro ready. I know he's mentally advanced and everything, and there is some of that feel stuff. So I'm curious how he hits the ground running, how they use him, and do any of the pass catchers step up and emerge to be at least a long-term B option, a long-term secondary option. At least someone step up. If Mingo can get into that role, any of these guys look like they can stick in the near or middle term. Is DJ Chark come back for after this year? All those types of players. Is Chenault worth sticking around? Who's the other guy from LSU? Oh, Terrence Marshall.
Forget about him.
Does he become anything? Yes. But it's like, do any of these guys become something that you can commit to for at least the rest of Bryce Young's kind of rookie contract? So I think just the passing game in general is the huge X factor, because I'm pretty bullish about the run game and I'm pretty bullish about the defense. So let's see how the number one pick looks. Let's see how these new coaches, we'll see them earn their money.
I had Chark.
Yeah, love it.
He was really efficient last year when he was throwing the ball. Among players of 50 targets last season, he was 8th in yards per target. And
he's a good player.
And first downs per target.
Yeah.
He had 15 air yards per target last year, which was in like the top 5. So that helps. But he was ahead of Tyreek Hill in yards per target last season. And maybe that's a boost because the Lions offense was just really efficient in general. Yeah. But I thought he really gave them something in the games that he did play. It's just a matter of, can he stay on the field?
That's it.
And if he can, I think that him, Thielen, Mingo, Hurst, it all makes enough sense where I feel good about where Bryce Young is at. But that hinges on DJ Chark being that vertical outside the numbers guy for you. And can he be?
When he's been nothing but productive when he's healthy. It's just getting him on the field. I love DJ Chark because he's an X. He's a real deal vertical X. He's my type of guy all the way. He's a skinny version, but he's my guy all the way. So I thought as for a cheap signing, I really like that for this team. That one made a lot of sense to me. It's like, why not?
Yeah, I agree.
More than competent. So might as well spin the wheel on him.
Breakout candidate for the Panthers.
I went with JC Horn. He got drafted before Surtain, so that's always going to be kind of like above him. And then he got hurt right away. But when he's healthy, he's shown glimpses of a real top-tier corner, a man top-tier corner that can really lock a guy down on the island. So I want to see him stay healthy. I just want to see him keep ascending. I think he will. I think he'll be a breakout player this year. I think their defense, if it hits the top end of what we think of the expectations, I think he'll be a part of that. They'll just be able to what he can unlock for a defense. So JC Horn's one. Really, really good player that maybe has gotten bumped because of who got getting drafted before what the other guy that we're considering a superstar already.
I'm going with Frankie Louvu. My guy, Frankie Louvu.
Frankie Louvu.
I just think
box score filler. Andre Karolinko, baby. That's all he does.
He's such a weird player, and the way they used him last year, but I just think he's really got something to him. And awesome. I think he fits within this defense. And again, weirdos like us probably know who Frankie Louvu is after last season. But if this is a defense where they're in the top 10 and we get to a point where I don't know how many national TV games the Panthers are playing, but like, let's hypothetically, there's a Thursday night game where the Panthers are
I was going to say, there's going to be a Thursday night game.
and we flash up. They play the Saints, I think in week 2 on Monday night. Okay.
Oh, look at that.
So I mean, maybe that's a little bit too early.
Okay. So we actually know what
they play the Bears on a Thursday night in November. And we get to that game midway through the season and you have the stats flash up or man, the Panthers are 5th in total defense and look at all this. And Joe, we should talk about Frankie Louvu and, and what he's been doing this season and what he can do for that. I see that as a potential thing that can happen. Yeah. So I just think that he's one of those guys. He started
with the Jets as a special teamer, and they let him on the street, and the Panthers took a chance on him. Look at him go.
There it is. So that is why I'm going with my guy, Frankie Louvu. He rushes the passer. He can play a linebacker as just a pivotal, flexible piece. I just think he makes sense in this defense.
We talk about these Swiss Army knives on defense, usually safeties, but it's like he's like the front 7 version. Like he's kind of like that for that. He's awesome. He's definitely an athletic football show all-star. He's definitely on that team. He's a first ballot all-star.
What does success look like for the 2023 Panthers?
I have no idea. I said
it's really hard to come up with an answer.
I had no idea what to say. I really don't. I don't know what they think. So I don't know. I said a winning record, I think, is a successful year, whether it takes you to the playoffs or not. But I think a winning record, because you don't have a first round pick anyways. So who cares?
You might as well win.
That's why
the Justin Houston signing, it's like, you might as well win. You're giving your picks away anyway. I would prefer that they lose.
Yeah.
If the Panthers went like 4-13 this
Oh,
year,
yeah,
I
you-
wouldn't.
You wouldn't
I'd be okay with it. I don't think they will. I think they'll be competitive. In my mind, confirmation that Young is the guy.
Yes.
Because everything they've spent on him, by the end of the year, I want to know he's the guy. And then indications that the bets you made on the coaching staff paid off.
Right.
That's it.
That's really it. The biggest moves are the ones that we need answers on. And that was moving up for the #1 pick and this coaching staff. I mean, those were their big moves this offseason. So let's see it work.